Have you ever witnessed a moment when, in just a few short minutes, every gaze, every prejudice, every mocking laugh was turned completely upside down? A moment when the truth, once revealed, not only silenced an entire room, but forced a whole system of power to bow its head. Today's story begins exactly like that, on a flight that seemed ordinary, but became a turning point in aviation history. Morning dawned at Atlanta International Airport. Golden light streamed through vast glass panels, reflecting off polished marble floors. Passengers queued at the departure gate, each carrying luggage and their own purpose. Some were executives heading for high-stakes negotiations, others simply trying to get home. Among them, no one imagined that a single first-class ticket was about to shake the world they knew. Inside Skylink Airlines' first-class cabin, everything radiated luxury. Soft lights glowed over leather seats. Drink trays sparkled, and the faint tapping of keyboards came from business travelers finishing last emails before takeoff. It was a space of quiet, discipline, and a touch of smugness. Hardly anyone paid much attention to the woman in seat 2A. She wore a simple cream blazer, her hair neatly tied at the nape, her eyes sharp but calm. A half-finished report sat open on her tablet. To those around her, she was just another black passenger with a plain exterior, seeming slightly out of place in this refined setting. Then the air was cut by a sharp voice. "Sorry, miss, this isn't a welfare line. First class is for those who can actually afford it." Every passenger looked up at once. A flight attendant, Janelle Williams, stood before seat 2A, her eyes flashing disdain. In that instant, the refined calm of first class turned into a stage of tension, every gaze pinned on one person. The woman lifted her head. Her voice wasn't loud nor trembling, but clear and steady. "I have a first-class ticket." She pulled it from her pocket. Janelle snatched it, holding it under the light as if checking for forgery, then shoved it hard back against her chest, the sharp thud echoing like an invisible slap. "Don't even try it, sweetheart. People like you don't belong here." The cabin froze. A few frowned, some smirked, and others hurriedly pulled out their phones. A businessman in seat 1C muttered, "Classic fraud. Needs to be recorded." He hit record, camera trained on the woman's composed face. Across the aisle, an elderly woman whispered to her husband, "Always the same. They keep trying to sneak into places they don't belong." He nodded, his eyes cold with contempt. Online, it began to spread. Janelle switched on the live stream, smiling into her phone. "Hey folks, another one who thinks they can sit wherever they want without paying. Watch this." Viewer count spiked, 20, 80, then hundreds within minutes. Comments flooded in. "Kick her out." "Definitely a fake ticket." "Cheap stunt." In the cabin, those words echoed as giggles, as stares that branded a human being by nothing more than skin color and presence. But the woman did not react. She simply adjusted her blazer, revealing a Patek Philippe watch gleaming under the light. On her lap sat an Hermes Birkin bag, luxury beyond what most passengers could imagine. Yet, instead of respect, it drew more sneers. "Fake," someone muttered, "not fooling anyone." When her phone buzzed, she picked up, speaking just loudly enough for a few to hear. "Inform the board, I'll be 20 minutes late." The cabin burst into laughter. The man in 1C sneered. "Now she's pretending she has a board meeting. What is it, McDonald's corporate?" Laughter spread, feeding on Janelle's scorn. The scene, once a sanctuary of quiet, had become an arena. One woman against a crowd, not with shouting, not with protest, but with a silence so steady it unsettled them more than anger ever could. But you, the viewer of this story, know something they do not. You've seen enough in stories like this to recognize that such silence is not weakness. It is the signal of a storm about to break, because within minutes, seat 2A would no longer be the place of a suspicious passenger. It would be the center of a truth that would silence every person in that cabin. So here's the question for you. If it were you, watching this unfold, what would you do? Would you raise your phone to record, stay silent, or speak up? The answer lies in the next part, where this entire farce will be overturned, and their world, and yours, will never be the same again. The sound of typing and notification chimes from dozens of phones rippled through the cabin like a strange background score. Eyes no longer lingered only on the woman in seat 2A. They flicked constantly down to screens, where the live stream's viewer count climbed by the second. Janelle held her phone, her voice shifting into that familiar social media performance tone, exaggerated, mocking, gleeful. "Hey everyone, it's Janelle. Just another day in first class, and guess what? We've got a passenger who thinks she can sit wherever she wants. Yep, no ticket, no payment." Just sat herself right down. As she spoke, she aimed her camera squarely at Kesha Johnson's calm face. Emojis flooded the screen. Laughing faces, winks, comments raced across. "Kick her out. Definitely a fake ticket." Another victim stunt. The viewer count shot past 200, then 400. Within minutes, the clip was trending on the airport's internal network. Ground staff on break tapped their phones, curiosity peaked. The flood of malicious comments swelled, devouring the atmosphere. The man in seat 1C, David Boston, wasn't about to be outdone. He turned his phone, angling it toward a colleague beside him, and spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "Everyone, look closely. This is arrogance on display. Someone who thinks they can sit in first class without paying." His fingers flew across the screen. Within 3 minutes, his video-tagged Ulbricher first-class fraud had been shared nearly 50 times. In 1D, Margaret Thompson, the same woman who had muttered, "They're always like this," now lifted her chin, as if Janelle's live stream confirmed her prejudice. She turned to the rows behind. "See? Proof. She never should have been here to begin with." Some passengers nodded. Others crossed their arms smugly. Meanwhile, in seat 3B, Maria Santos sat in a small pocket of silence. The young Latina woman gripped her bag straps, memories rushing back. The time she was humiliated in a restaurant, told she didn't belong. The words caught in her throat, but her eyes filled. She had seen Kesha's first-class ticket when they boarded together, yet her own past wound kept her silent. Outside the cabin, social media roared. David Boston's video spread in private airline groups, captioned bitterly, "Another cheat at it again." One account claiming to be airline staff wrote, "Too familiar." People like that just cause trouble. The digital storm of outrage swelled, and inside the plane, it became stares, whispers, and rising hostility. Janelle wasn't finished. She shifted the angle, shoving the phone close to Kesha's face. "There, you see, sitting still, saying nothing, not reacting. If she really had a ticket, why stay this silent? Only a liar pretends to be calm." The chat burst into laughter. The comment, "Professional scammer," drew waves of likes. Yet Kesha Johnson sat unmoved, hand resting lightly on her Hermes Birkin, eyes unblinking, gaze steady. No anger, no protest, only a silence that unsettled the cabin. To some, it looked like guilt. To others, it was an inexplicable composure, a quiet kind of power. Minutes passed, and social media exploded. Comments now came in multiple languages. Someone overlaid the words "luxury scammer" on the live stream. Another screen recorded and reposted on TikTok. "When you think you can sit in first class without paying." Within 5 minutes, views had crossed 10,000. Inside the cabin, phones buzzed nonstop. A cluster of young passengers whispered, "It's going viral." Another said aloud, "We're watching social media history happen right here." But beneath the glee, the air grew suffocating. The man in 4C, who had stayed silent, now frowned, gripping his armrest. He saw the injustice clearly. He saw Kesha, saw the ticket peeking from her blazer. But when his eyes met the warning glare of a security officer who had just entered, he sank back down. His courage surfaced only as a heavy sigh. Social media, of course, knew no fear. Janelle's live stream had passed 500 viewers. The jeers poured in endlessly, the online crowd emboldened by Kesha's silence. The less she reacted, the more convinced they felt. A pinned comment read, "She's just waiting to play the victim card." At that moment, Kesha's phone buzzed again. She answered briefly, voice calm, "I'll be late. Tell them I'll arrive 20 minutes behind." One line, enough to ignite another wave of laughter. David Boston shouted, "Hear that? She claims she has a board meeting. Too much drama." Social media caught fire with fresh fuel. In another corner, Maria Santos lifted her head, her lips trembling. She knew the truth, but fear kept her voiceless. Instead, she opened her notes app, typing quickly, "Seat 2A, first-class ticket. I saw it." Words like a private vow that at least she hadn't fully turned away. On screen, the last comment before everything would change flashed, "Kick her out now. Delaying a flight over this fraud is humiliating." Viewer count, 789. Tension in the cabin, unbearable. The woman in 2A still sat silent, still calm, but that very calm was becoming a storm, because within minutes every phone would turn its lens away from her and toward those mocking her. And the trending hashtag "Sonrisar First Class Fraud" would soon transform into something no one in that cabin could have foreseen. Heavy footsteps echoed down the narrow aisle, reverberating through the already stifling air of the cabin. 2 security officers appeared, clad in black uniforms, broad-shouldered, their steady stride pulling every gaze toward them. One held a radio, the other crossed his arms, posture ready for enforcement. "What's happening here?" Officer Martinez's deep, gravelly voice cut through the cabin, a command that required no explanation. Janelle jumped in immediately, her tone sharp, her authority borrowed from the moment itself. "This passenger is in the wrong seat. She forced her way into first class without a ticket. She refuses to leave." Without checking, Martinez nodded. As if this scenario were all too familiar, he turned toward Kesha Johnson, eyes skimming over her simple blazer, the Hermes Birkin resting on her lap before meeting her calm gaze. Yet instead of asking questions, he simply said, "Ma'am, please collect your belongings. We need to move you back to economy." In that instant, time seemed to freeze. No sound, only the pounding hearts of those who knew the truth but lacked the courage to speak it. Keisha gently set her phone down on the tray table, lifting her eyes directly to Martinez. Her voice was low, smooth as flowing water. "I have a first-class ticket, and I purchased it legitimately." The answer was nothing short of a challenge. But Martinez didn't flinch. He turned to Janelle, nodding. "Confirm she's refusing to comply, correct?" Janelle nodded hard, eyes shining with satisfaction at having backup on her side. Her live stream continued. Viewers thrilled as if watching a climax unfold. Comments raced. "Drag her out." "That's right. No concessions." David Boston, still clutching his phone, whispered into his camera, "You see this? This is the truth exposed. Airport police are about to remove her." He smirked, convinced this video would bring him thousands of followers. Yet, amid the storm, a hesitant voice broke through. The black man in seat 4C stood, speaking firmly. "Excuse me, but I saw her ticket. It clearly said first class." His voice carried, resolute. Yet Martinez snapped back instantly. "Sit down, sir. This is not your concern." The cabin tightened even further. Margaret Thompson, the older woman, spoke again, her voice sweet yet venomous. "Don't let her stall any longer. This is obvious fraud." Heads around her nodded, her words taken as truth. Kesha didn't argue. Instead, she pulled out her phone, typing swiftly, short, precise messages, one to her assistant, one to her legal team, and one to a contact labeled simply "board chair, personal." She placed the phone face down, screen dark. But the tension in the cabin thickened. Online, the hashtag "Junior First Class Fraud" was exploding. Within 10 minutes, nearly 200 shares, hundreds of vicious comments. "This is like a TV drama. Don't let a fraud delay the flight. Teach her a lesson." Janelle's live stream hit nearly 300 viewers, the digital crowd egging her on. Meanwhile, the wall clock ticked. 8 minutes until departure. Pressure pressed down on Martinez and the crew. The radio crackled. "Gate 12A, report status. Aircraft must depart now, cannot miss the slot." Janelle smirked, signaling Martinez. "See, we can't wait any longer." Martinez nodded, his hand brushing the radio. "We have a non-compliant passenger. May need additional support to escort her off the plane." Whispers rose across the cabin. Some chimed in, demanding Kesha's removal. Others, fewer, exchanged uneasy glances, sensing something was wrong. Maria Santos whispered to herself, "She has a ticket. I saw it." But the words dissolved into the air, too faint for anyone to hear. Kesha sat still. No resistance, no arguments. Her eyes were steady, bright, and silent. That silence made Martinez hesitate for a beat, but the ticking clock and Janelle's pressure pulled him back. David Boston lifted his phone for a close-up. "See this, everyone. This is what happens with fraud. Security is taking her down." Comments exploded. "Yes. End it." Another voice cut in, this time from the cockpit. Captain Rodriguez, firm and decisive. "We need this passenger issue resolved immediately. The tower is threatening to cut our slot." The cabin split under two crushing forces, the outside pressure of the ticking clock and air traffic control, and the inside weight of the crowd and social media. And in the center, a single woman, still composed, still unmoved. Martinez's hand gripped the radio, ready to give the order to return to the gate. But just then, Kesha shifted slightly. She slipped her hand inside her blazer and drew out a small, black, compact object. Not a weapon, not papers. A simple leather case. Business card holder. She placed it on the tray, slid one card out, and laid it face down. Her voice calm, deliberate. Before you make this decision, call Captain Rodriguez here. Some things only he should witness. In the cabin, no one fully understood the meaning of her words, but everyone felt the atmosphere jolt, as if the air itself had skipped a beat. That small card, lying quietly, felt like an explosive charge, warning that this charade was about to flip. The clock ticked down, 6 minutes to departure. Eyes darted, uncertainty spread, but the live stream kept running, comments screaming. And in seat 2A, Kesha Johnson leaned slightly forward, a cold glint flickering in her gaze. The real storm was only just beginning. The cabin fell into silence, broken only by the faint hum of phones and the low drone of the air system. The business card lay face down on the tray before Kesha Johnson, an unopened mystery yet heavy enough to weigh down the entire room. Martinez frowned, skeptical. What's the point of this? It won't change procedure. But his voice, though pressed to sound firm, carried a trace of hesitation. Kesha didn't rush. She rested a fingertip lightly on the card, slowly turning it so the light glinted along the thin gold trim around its leather edge. A small detail, but one anyone familiar with true power would recognize. This was no ordinary business card. Janelle, still live streaming, burst out laughing. Oh God, a business card. Who do you think you are that some little gimmick will save you? Online viewers jeered in unison. She printed it at home. What an actress. Don't fall for it. But in seat 3B, Maria Santos leaned forward. She caught a glimpse of embossed lettering along the edge. Her eyes widened, heartbeat pounding. She recognized the name, a name known across Latin America's aviation industry. Yet her throat closed, leaving her unable to speak. Kesha fixed her gaze on Martinez, her tone soft yet clear. I respect you, but some decisions are beyond your authority. Call Captain Rodriguez here. This is an issue only he should handle. Martinez clenched his jaw. Less than 5 minutes until departure. Janelle pushed. We don't have time. Get her off now. But then, as if on cue, a voice from the cockpit announced, Captain Rodriguez requests the senior manager immediately. It concerns passenger 2A. The scene shifted. David Boston swung his phone to film Jenkins, the flight manager, entering with a tablet, face cold and stern. What's the problem here? Janelle quickly reported. Passenger 2A, wrong seat, fake ticket, refuses to comply. Jenkins nodded, stepped forward, and held out his hand. I'll need to see your ticket and ID. For the first time, Kesha allowed a faint smile. She handed them over, slowly, deliberately. The ticket showed clearly. Seat 2A, first class. Purchased directly from the airline's website. Price, $2,847. ID, Dr. Kesha Johnson. Address, Buckhead, the wealthiest district in Atlanta. Jenkins frowned. On paper, flawless. But 15 years of experience made him wary. He raised his voice so the whole cabin could hear. We've seen high-end forgeries before. This could be one of them. I'll need to verify. Kesha said nothing. Instead, she calmly turned over the card on the tray, revealing its face. Light caught the embossed lettering. Washington Aerospace Industries Dr. Kesha Johnson, Chief Executive Officer and Founder. The cabin seemed to choke on its own breath. Nearest to her, Maria gasped under her breath. Trembling, oh my God. Beside her, the black man in 4C leaned in, then asked, What is it? Maria just shook her head, speechless. David Boston zoomed in with his phone. Viewers online shouted, Read it! What does it say? And when he muttered aloud, halting, Washington Aerospace, CEO. Even his own voice cracked. Comments exploded. No way. Is this real? Washington Aerospace is the biggest aircraft lessor in the U.S. Janelle's face drained of color. She staggered back, phone shaking in her hand as her live stream chat turned hostile. Wait, is this real? Look closely at the card. If it is, then... Floods of shocked emojis filled the screen. Jenkins froze. He knew the name. Washington Aerospace was one of the top 3 firms controlling aircraft leasing and maintenance contracts in North America, which meant this very aircraft could belong to her company. In a single moment, the hierarchy in the cabin inverted completely. The woman mocked, doubted, live-streamed as a fraud, now sat composed, while everyone else stumbled to justify their silence. Kesha spoke at last, nudging the card gently toward Jenkins, her voice even. "You want verification? Call our office directly. The 24/7 number is on the back." Martinez swallowed hard, stepping back. The digital crowd, expecting to watch a fraud dragged out, instead drowned in a stunning twist. The hashtag Drishar First Class Fraud was suddenly pushed aside by a new one. CEOON2A. The clock ticked. 3 minutes to departure. Pressure remained, but power in the cabin had shifted. No longer Janelle, not Jenkins, not Martinez. Every gaze was fixed on one person, the woman still seated in 2A, calm as if no storm had ever touched her. The turning point had arrived, and this was only the beginning. The cabin dropped into a hush, as if everyone were waiting for a single signal, and that signal came from the cockpit door. It swung open, and Captain Rodriguez stepped out. He was in his early 50s, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, eyes that had seen thousands of flight hours now gleaming with an uncharacteristic wariness. The entire cabin went silent at once. Those still whispering or snickering suddenly swallowed their words. In aviation, when the captain emerges, everything becomes serious. Rodriguez walked slowly, each step deliberate, like a commander striding into battle. He cast a quick glance at Janelle, then fixed his eyes on seat 2A. The moment his gaze fell on the business card lying on the tray table, his whole body froze. His eyes widened, his breath caught. Nearby passengers noticed immediately something was off. The cold professional mask was gone. In its place, his expression shifted from suspicion to fear. "Step back," he ordered, his voice sharp as steel. "Everyone, step back from seat 2A. Martinez and Jenkins exchanged baffled looks. "But Captain," Martinez began, but Rodriguez cut him off, eyes never leaving Kesha Johnson. "That's an order. Step back." The tone in his voice left no room for challenge. The 2 officers, moments ago ready to escort her off, immediately retreated. Janelle also stepped back, phone trembling in her hand. Live stream still running as viewers erupted. What's happening? Why is the captain reacting like this? Who is that woman? Rodriguez advanced another step. He dipped his head slightly, almost a respectful nod. "Dr. Johnson, my sincerest apologies. There has been a grave misunderstanding." Sound in the cabin all but vanished. Passengers could hear nothing but heartbeats and the faint hum of the auxiliary engine. The man in 4C leaned back, whispering, "I knew it." Maria in 3B covered her mouth, eyes wide, lips trembling as she whispered, "CEO, Washington Aerospace." David Boston in 1C, the man who had launched Rodriguez First Class Fraud, zoomed his phone tight on the captain's face. The live stream flipped direction in seconds. Comments flooded. "No way. She's actually the CEO? Everything's reversed." Rodriguez raised his head, voice taut but decisive. "Ladies and gentlemen, the passenger in seat 2A is a VIP. This was a grave systems error and will be rectified immediately. Please remain calm." But Kesha Johnson didn't let him tie it up neatly. She gently lifted the business card, holding it so the light revealed every embossed letter, then set it back down. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word struck like a blade. "Captain, this is no longer a misunderstanding. This was a public violation recorded by dozens of witnesses and hundreds online. The question now is, what will you do to correct it?" The air shifted. Everyone realized they had just witnessed power turn on its axis. Janelle, once smug, was pale as chalk. Jenkins, who had cast doubt, now stared at the floor, hiding his discomfort. Rodriguez knew he had no choice. Slowly, he turned to the entire cabin, speaking with solemn gravity. "Ladies and gentlemen, I confirm that the passenger in seat 2A, Dr. Kesha Johnson, is the CEO and founder of Washington Aerospace Industries, Skylink Airline's largest strategic partner." The words detonated like a bomb. Gasps, murmurs, even cries of shock rippled through the cabin. Those who had mocked her lowered their heads, unable to meet her gaze. The man in 1C slumped into his seat, muttering, "I streamed all of it live." "Oh God." Janelle panicked, angling her phone away. But too late. Comments poured in. She live-streamed, insulting the CEO of their leasing company. The airline is finished. This will be a national scandal. Kesha remained composed. She smoothed her sleeve, looked directly at Rodriguez, and gave a small, razor-thin smile. Now then, Captain, let's resolve this. I trust you understand the scope of what has just happened. Rodriguez nodded sharply, sweat beading on his brow. Yes, Dr. Johnson, I will report to regional leadership immediately. And in that moment, everyone in the cabin understood. The balance of power had shifted forever. The woman once mocked had not only reclaimed her seat, she had forced the entire system to bow. In the eyes of the passengers, she was no longer a victim. She was a leader, someone who could transform personal humiliation into a reckoning for an entire industry. And the real confrontation had only just begun. The air in the cabin thickened. As if everyone thought the revelation, Kesha Johnson being the CEO of Washington Aerospace, was already shocking enough. But that was only the first layer. Kesha picked up her phone, her fingers moving swiftly, then set the screen down on the tray table, turning it toward Rodriguez and Jenkins. The glow reflected off their faces. On the screen appeared a live asset tracking system. Not social media, not private messages, but a real-time database of aircraft ownership. She pointed at a string of characters. NAIRM7WA. This, her voice steady and sharp, every word landing like a hammer, is the registration number of the aircraft we are sitting on. And this is the lease record. This aircraft, along with 66 others in Skylink's fleet, is owned by Washington Aerospace Industries. Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten. He had flown for over 30 years, read through hundreds of contracts, but never imagined standing in front of the actual owner of the plane he was piloting. Passengers nearby erupted in whispers. Maria covered her mouth, whispering, "She's not just a CEO. She owns the fleet itself." The man in 4C leaned forward, nodding. "Exactly. This isn't a VIP passenger. This is the landlord." David Boston, the one live streaming, choked on his words. His camera shook as he zoomed in on Kesha's screen. Clear as day, the contract terms glowed. Lease term, 7 years, renewable. Contract value, $2.3 million USD annually. Comments exploded. No way. The airline is just the renter. She's the true owner. The twist of the century. Jenkins turned pale. He stammered, No. This must be some mistake." But he knew better. The system she had pulled up was an industry-verified database, impossible to fake. Kesha fixed her gaze on him, her tone cold as steel. "Mr. Jenkins, you just tried to accuse me of fraud, while I am sitting on an aircraft owned by my company, leased to yours. If anyone is sitting in the wrong seat here, it might be you." The cabin froze. A few passengers couldn't help but chuckle in disbelief. Maria leaned toward the person beside her and whispered, "This is the peak of corporate karma." Janelle Williams, once triumphant on her live stream, was now trembling, unable to meet the camera. The comments on her feed flipped entirely. She just humiliated the aircraft's owner. Career's over. No way out of this scandal. Rodriguez wiped sweat from his forehead, his stance shifting as though standing before a judge. "Dr. Johnson, I don't know what to say except my deepest apologies. This is a catastrophe." But Kesha cut him off, her voice calm, deliberate. "Captain, the catastrophe isn't that you mistreated me. It's that you could do this to anyone. Today, I had the power to stop it. But what about the passengers who don't own fleets, who don't have this card?" She lifted the business card, tapping it lightly against the tray. The sound was soft, yet it echoed in every mind. "Remember when she told me I was in the wrong seat?" Kesha glanced at Janelle, her tone unshaken. "The truth is, it's your airline that's in the wrong seat when it allows itself to discriminate, insult, and humiliate passengers aboard planes owned by my company." Rodriguez turned his face away, but Jenkins was stricken silent. Every excuse crumbled. He knew if this went public, his career would end in disgrace. Social media hadn't waited. David Boston's video was climbing the aviation trending charts. Pilots, technicians, and even industry reporters were sharing, "CEO of Washington Aerospace discriminated against on her own aircraft." Maria, no longer willing to stay silent, stood up and spoke loudly. "I saw her ticket from the start. It clearly said first class. And now we know why she never had to scream or prove anything, because she not only bought the ticket, she owns the plane. Noise filled the cabin, embarrassment, shock, disbelief. Margaret, the older woman, bowed her head, hands gripping her handkerchief until they shook. Every word she had spoken earlier now cut back at her like a blade. Rodriguez exhaled heavily, as though the weight of the entire airline industry pressed on his shoulders. He lowered his head and spoke quietly, but his words carried. "Dr. Johnson, please tell us what we should do next." And Keisha, serene, tilted her head slightly. "Captain, I never wanted to flaunt power, but today I had to use it to remind you respect can never be outsourced. It must start with the people sitting in this cabin." The words sliced deep, but rang as a warning. The cabin fell silent. Cameras still rolled, social media still roared, and everyone understood this was only the first layer of truth, because Keisha Johnson's power didn't end with owning the fleet. She still held another ace, one she was about to play. The next twist would be even more devastating. The cabin now felt like a public courtroom. The woman in seat 2A, once scorned called a fraud, was now the judge. And everyone else had to face the weight of undeniable evidence. Rodriguez still stood there, sweat beading on his forehead, hand gripping his pilot's cap. Jenkins had sunk into a side seat, eyes darting as if searching for an escape. Janelle fumbled to end her live stream, but it was far too late. Hundreds had already witnessed everything from the start. Keisha Johnson leaned forward, lifted her phone, opened a document management app, and scrolled through a string of files. Then she turned the screen toward Rodriguez and Jenkins. Her voice was steady, professorial, each word sharp enough to cut. "Let's start with the basics. Passenger Service Manual, Section 12.4. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the cabin. The rule states, any dispute regarding the validity of a passenger's documents must be verified through official channels before any public action is taken. Was that procedure followed in my case? The question dropped into silence. Jenkins opened his mouth, but no words came. Rodriguez lowered his eyes. Everyone knew the answer was no. Keisha didn't stop. She scrolled further. Second, social media policy, April revision. It strictly forbids staff from live streaming or recording passengers without consent. I believe everyone here just watched flight attendant Janelle Williams broadcast this entire incident to hundreds online. Janelle trembled, swallowing hard. Her live stream still glowed on the phone. Viewers now over 600. Comments flooded. Crystal clear violation. The airline's liable big time. Where are the lawyers? This is gold. Next, Keisha continued calmly, as if she had prepared every move. Anti-discrimination protocol, Clause 3.2. Employees are forbidden from making judgments based on race, gender, or economic status. The remarks made here, "you don't belong here," definitely fraud, are direct violations. And all of it has been recorded by dozens of witnesses and multiple devices in this cabin. A wave of sighs, murmurs. The elderly woman, Margaret Thompson, bowed her head, hands trembling. She knew her own words had added to the prejudice. Rodriguez swallowed hard, trying to interject. "Dr. Johnson, I acknowledge there have been severe breaches, but if we could just—" Keisha cut him off with a glance, not harsh, but commanding enough to silence him. "Captain, the issue isn't only the violations. The issue is that the system allowed them to happen brazenly, publicly, and even encouraged." She pointed to the front row, where David Boston sat, still holding his phone. One passenger live-streamed under the hashtag Dursire First Class Fraud, turning me into a public spectacle. And that only happened because your employee initiated it and fueled that bias. David lowered his phone, his face flushed. He muttered, I thought—" Keisha interrupted. "You thought you were exposing a cheat. In reality, you were amplifying discrimination, turning a victim into entertainment." The cabin was so still that no one dared cough. The drone of the auxiliary engine became the backdrop to every indictment. Keisha drew a deep breath, her voice soft yet cutting. "And furthermore, Federal Aviation Guidelines, Part 91, Subsection D. Any passenger with a valid ticket has the right to occupy the seat purchased, unless a specific, documented safety reason applies. I had a valid ticket. I sat in my rightful seat. Instead, I was accused of forgery, threatened with removal, and publicly humiliated. Rodriguez closed his eyes, hand tightening on his cap. He knew every word she spoke was true. Maria in 3B stood up, her voice trembling but clear. I can testify. I saw her ticket as she boarded. It stated first class, beyond doubt. The man in 4C added firmly, I saw it too. There's no denying it. Those affirmations were the final nails sealing the coffin of any defense. Kesha placed her phone down again, this time opening a social media analytics app. The numbers glowed coldly. 347 viewers, 214 shares, hashtag Skylink discrimination climbing into Atlanta's top 10 trends. She lifted her head, eyes piercing the cabin. You thought you could push me out of this seat, off this plane, and bury the incident. But no. In just 20 minutes, the entire world already knows the truth. And the issue is no longer one woman in seat 2A. It is an airline, a whole system that has exposed its face. On David's live stream, the reaction erupted. Comments flooded. This is history. A masterclass in confronting power. Not a scandal, a case study. Rodriguez finally spoke, voice hoarse. Dr. Johnson, you're right. We failed across the board. But please, give us the chance to make it right. I'll report immediately to regional leadership. Kesha gave a small nod, then delivered the line that chilled everyone to the core. Captain, remember this. What just happened is not merely an incident. It is evidence, and that evidence will decide the future of this airline. The cabin was deathly silent. But everyone understood this was only the prelude, because Kesha Johnson's power still had another deeper layer, and once revealed, there would be no room left for excuses. The air in the first-class cabin felt as though it had already reached its peak of drama, but in truth, it was only halfway. Dr. Kesha Johnson still sat quietly in seat 2A, her face calm beyond belief. Many thought the twist, her being the owner of the aircraft and lesser of Skylink's fleet, was the final knockout blow. But those who knew Kesha understood. She never struck with just one move. She gently slid her Hermes Birkin aside, this time pulling out another card case, smaller, thinner, black velvet, embossed with a silver logo. The cabin held its breath. Anyone who still dared to doubt kept their eyes locked, waiting to see what card she would play next. Kesha opened the case and drew out another business card. No shimmering gold trim this time. Its simplicity was dangerous. A stark white line of text, the Meridian Investment Group logo. In the corner, small but heavy, Managing Partner, Transportation Sector. She set the card on the tray table, turning it so all could see. Her voice rose, steady and hammer-like. Washington Aerospace leases aircraft to Skylink. Correct. But there is another truth. Through Meridian Investment Group, I am a major shareholder in Skylink's parent company, Consolidated Airways International. It was as if an electric current shot through every spine in the cabin. Some passengers gawked. Maria clasped her mouth, whispering, "Oh my God." The man in 4C struck the seat in front of him lightly, muttering, "Impossible. A shareholder of the parent company? This isn't customer power. This is owner power." Rodriguez froze. Jenkins actually dropped the folder in his hands, papers scattering to the carpet. Janelle, face pale, hands trembling, could only stammer, "No, no way." Kesha remained composed. She opened a finance app on her phone, stock charts and ownership tables glowing across the screen. She held it up to Captain Rodriguez and Jenkins. Meridian currently holds 12.7% of Consolidated Airways International. As a portfolio manager, I have the authority to call an emergency board meeting, to vote on policy, to remove senior executives if necessary. Every word pierced like an arrow. The entire cabin, every passenger, every live stream camera captured it. No more doubt, no more maybe fake. This was undeniable. David Boston, the man in 1C, who had gleefully launched Saturnsure first-class fraud, now shook so hard he could barely hold his phone. His clip had already spread widely, but its contents no longer indicted Kesha. It had become damning evidence against the airline. Online viewers went wild. She's a major shareholder of the parent company. This isn't just discrimination. This is a governance crisis. The airline is finished. This will be an Ivy League MBA case study. Jenkins scrambled to salvage authority, voice trembling. But even so, you must still comply with crew instructions. Shareholding doesn't permit you to defy orders on board. Kesha's lips curved into the faintest smile, her eyes sharp as blades. Did you just invoke the word power? I am not defying anything. I remained seated in the seat I lawfully purchased. It was you and your staff who turned compliance into a public humiliation. And now, remember this, I am not just a customer, not just the lesser of your fleet. I also sit in the boardroom you answer to. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Some passengers even began to clap softly. Not applause, but an awed reflex to a devastating checkmate. Rodriguez bowed his head, whispering almost to himself, God, we just insulted one of the largest shareholders of the company. Kesha slowly closed the card case, placed it back into her bag, and spoke deliberately, as if sealing the verdict. You may wrong a passenger, you may abuse power against a black woman, but when every action traces upward to the board of directors, then I'm sorry. This mistake is no longer an incident. It is a systemic crime. The entire cabin sank into silence. No more mocking laughter, no more cruel whispers, only the crushing quiet of people realizing they had just taken part in a moment destined for aviation history. And this was only the second layer of the climax, because everyone knew when a major shareholder lays down conditions, what follows is never gentle negotiation. It would be an emergency negotiation at the highest level, broadcast on speakerphone for the entire cabin to hear. In the first-class cabin, every eye fixed on a single point, Captain Rodriguez's phone. He stood frozen in the aisle, sweat breaking across his forehead, his hand gripping so tightly it trembled. In 30 years of flying, never had he faced a moment where his entire career could collapse from just a few minutes of failure. He swallowed hard, then dialed the airline's emergency line. His voice rasped. This is Captain Rodriguez. Skylink Flight SKU 1247. I need an immediate connection to Regional Director Morrison. Code red situation. The cabin went silent. From seat 1C, David Boston, the man once giddy to livestream, now held his phone steady but shaking, whispering to thousands of viewers, this is about to go all the way to the top. The line rang. Then a deep, firm voice answered, Morrison here. Rodriguez summoned all his courage. Sir, we have a severe incident. It involves Dr. Kesha Johnson. The cabin froze again. Morrison, on the other end, went silent for a few seconds, then demanded, his voice grinding out each word. Did you just say, Kesha Johnson? Yes, sir. She is on this flight. And a discrimination incident has occurred. The silence that followed was suffocating, every heartbeat audible. Then Morrison practically shouted, My God! Do you have any idea what you've done? You just publicly humiliated the CEO of Washington Aerospace in front of hundreds of witnesses and thousands more online. Rodriguez stammered, I know, sir. But the situation spiraled out of control. The live stream, social media, it's exploding. The hashtag #Skylink discrimination is trending. Morrison muttered a curse under his breath, then lowered his voice, though still loud enough for everyone in the cabin to hear through the speakerphone. Dr. Johnson, are you on the line? Kesha placed her phone on the tray table, leaned toward the mic. Her voice came steady, sharp as ice. I'm here, Director Morrison. No coughs, no whispers remained. First class had transformed into a silent courtroom, every passenger listening as if they'd been dropped into a closed-door board meeting broadcast live. Morrison drew a heavy breath, then said, Dr. Johnson, on behalf of Skylink Airlines, I extend our deepest apologies. This conduct is absolutely unacceptable. Kesha's reply was clipped. Apologies. I've heard too many. Your problem isn't words. It's the system. And that system has just exposed itself to the world. David Boston turned his camera toward his own face, whispering to his live stream. She's negotiating. With the regional director. On speakerphone. Oh my God, this has never happened before. Kesha pressed on, her voice never raised, yet each word slammed like a hammer. Let me recount the violations. 1. Your flight attendant accused me of ticket fraud without official verification. 2. They live stream my image without consent, violating both company policy and federal law. 3. Your flight manager attempted to force me off the aircraft despite my sitting in the legally purchased seat. All of it rooted in racial bias and class assumptions. On the other end, Morrison stayed silent. Only the clatter of his keyboard could be heard as he typed notes. 4. Kesha continued after a pause. Everything that happened was recorded, shared publicly, and is now trending nationwide. This isn't just an incident. This is a media, financial, and cultural disaster for your airline. Her last words made several passengers shiver. Even Margaret, the elderly woman who once mocked her, clasped her hands tightly, eyes downcast. Morrison exhaled sharply into the speaker. "Dr. Johnson, I admit everything you've said is true. I commit to immediate action. Please state your specific demands." Kesha glanced at her own phone. Stock data glowing on the screen. Skylink down 2.1% in the last 20 minutes. She lifted her head, voice unshakable. 3 immediate actions. 1. Terminate the employee who live-streamed and used discriminatory language. 2. Suspend the flight manager for failing to follow the verification protocol. 3. Issue a public apology from Skylink leadership within 24 hours, explicitly acknowledging the discriminatory nature of this incident. Morrison didn't hesitate. Agreed. All 3 demands will be executed immediately. But, Dr. Johnson, I fear that alone won't restore your trust. Kesha tilted her head, a faint, cold smile on her lips. Correct. Because I'm not just a passenger. I'm a major shareholder in Consolidated Airways, your parent company. And I will require systemic reform, not just scapegoats. Keyboard clatter returned, urgent. Morrison's voice trembled now. Please, give us the list of changes. We will implement them all. Kesha nodded slightly, her gaze sweeping the cabin, speaking not just to Morrison but to everyone on board. I will deliver a reform package, policies, training, cultural change, and it will become the new industry standard. If Skylink wants to survive, you will adopt it. Morrison answered firmly. We accept. Gasps rippled across the cabin. Passengers who had stayed silent now looked at Kesha with transformed eyes, not merely as a wronged customer, but as the woman rewriting airline policy in real time before them. Kesha closed her phone, ending the negotiation with a single line that echoed like a gavel strike. Good, then we begin today. In that moment, first class was no longer a luxurious cabin in the sky. It was an emergency boardroom where a CEO turned public humiliation into a weapon and forced an entire system of power to bow. The entire first-class cabin sat in silence after the speakerphone call with Director Morrison. But everyone knew this was only the beginning. Dr. Kesha Johnson was not the type to be satisfied with a flight attendant fired or a manager suspended. She now held something rare, an opportunity to turn a personal incident into a lever to reshape an entire corporation. Kesha sat upright, her voice warm yet firm, each word resonating clearly in the pressurized air. Director Morrison, you've agreed to 3 emergency actions. But if you stop there, Skylink will only be patching a small hole while the entire ship keeps sinking. What I demand is a comprehensive reform package, not just fixing procedure, but changing culture, changing the way this airline treats human beings. The cabin held its breath. Maria Santos leaned forward, eyes shining. The black man in 4C nodded slowly, whispering, "This is it. The moment." On the line, Morrison's voice came urgent. "Please, specify. I'll record everything. What you propose will be delivered to the board today." Kesha tilted her head slightly, her gaze sweeping the cabin, then began at a measured pace, like a commander unveiling a calculated plan. First, verification protocol. No passenger is ever to be accused on the basis of bias or personal suspicion. Any allegation of ticket fraud, documents, or misconduct must be verified through the central system before any public action is taken. No more attendants live streaming. No more managers rushing decisions without data. Rodriguez nodded repeatedly, while Jenkins hung his head. Second, mandatory training. Every Skylink employee, from flight attendants to managers, from security to call center staff, must undergo unconscious bias awareness training and de-escalation skills. Not a one-time formality, but recurring sessions with serious evaluations. Results reported publicly. Maria clenched her fists. Tears brimming, for the first time she felt protected by a policy that had never existed before. Kesha paused briefly, then continued. Third, transparency and reporting. Skylink will issue quarterly diversity and equity reports to shareholders, to partners, and to the public. Not as reassurance, but as proof. You are measuring, acting, and being held accountable. A murmur ran through the cabin. Some passengers, businessmen, nodded, understanding the weight of quarterly reports in the eyes of investors. Fourth, direct passenger feedback. From now on, any passenger who feels mistreated will have access to a hotline, a mobile app, and a direct reporting channel to executive leadership. No middlemen, no cover-ups. Every case logged and overseen by an independent body, free from flight management pressure. A young woman in 2C whispered, "If that had existed before, I wouldn't have had to stay silent when I was disrespected." Kesha leaned slightly closer to the mic, her eyes sharp. Fifth, leadership accountability. If a discriminatory incident occurs, responsibility does not stop at the frontline staff. Managers, supervisors, and even regional directors will share liability. No more scapegoats. No more "I didn't know." The culture of cover-ups ends today. Rodriguez drew a deep breath. He knew her words were true. Janelle was not the only one at fault. He, Jenkins, and the whole system bore responsibility. Kesha let the silence hang, giving everyone time to absorb each point. Then she lifted her voice for the first time with the cadence of a speech. "But above all, what I demand is cultural change. A culture where every passenger is seen first as a human being, not a skin color, not an outfit, not a social class. A culture where employees understand the power they hold is not for humiliation, but for service. A culture where respect is not a privilege, but the standard." The cabin went still, only the hum of the auxiliary engines in the background. Then from 4C, the black man's voice rang out, "Amen." A few claps followed, then more, until the whole cabin was clapping, slow, steady, insistent, like assent, like oath. On the line, Morrison responded, voice trembling yet resolute. "Dr. Johnson, you've just laid out the roadmap Skylink must follow. I pledge, as regional director, that I will sign the order today. The full board will receive the report within 24 hours. We will not evade." Kesha gave a small nod, her eyes softening slightly. She knew the real victory was not in who lost a job, but in forcing an entire corporation to change forever. She turned to the cabin, addressing the passengers. "You have witnessed this with your own eyes. I don't want anyone to think this was just a rare moment for someone with power. No. What I demanded today will become a shield for every other passenger, for those without black cards, without shares, without a board behind them. This change is for them." Maria broke down, tears rolling freely. David Boston lowered his head, whispering, "I was wrong, but I've recorded history." Morrison's voice affirmed one last time, echoing through the speakers. "Skylink Airlines commits. The reform package, from procedure to culture, will be enacted immediately, and we will turn today's shame into tomorrow's foundation." Kesha closed her phone, drawing a deep breath. In the cabin, all understood. A personal moment had become a milestone for the entire industry. The cabin fell silent again after the round of applause, but it was not the silence of exhaustion. It was the silence of people realizing they had just witnessed something far beyond an ordinary conflict. Dr. Kesha Johnson rose from seat 2A. The cabin lights caught the slim Patek Philippe on her wrist, but the real radiance came from her calm presence. She stepped a half-circle forward. No microphone, no speaker needed. Her voice was low, steady, carrying the timbre of someone who had spoken before billion-dollar boards, but was now speaking to ordinary people, accidental witnesses. "You have seen, you have heard, you have felt the tension, the false accusations, and the reversal when truth emerged. But let me ask, if not for the phones raised, if not for the honest witnesses, would the truth have ever come to light?" A pause. Eyes glanced from one another, then down to the phones still in their hands. "There is a concept I want to share, the role of a good witness. In every moment of injustice, there are always three groups: the perpetrator, the one who suffers, and the bystanders. And it is the third group that decides whether injustice continues or ends." Whispers stirred in the back rows. Maria Santos lifted her head, eyes wet but firm. The black man in 4C nodded slowly. "A good witness is not just someone who presses record. A good witness is the one who says, 'I saw. I will testify to the truth.' A good witness refuses to let fear silence them. And above all, a good witness understands that their small act may be the greatest shield for someone else." David Boston in 1C bowed his head. He remembered how he had once live-streamed with ridicule. Now barely audible, caught still on his own camera, he whispered, "I have to relearn." Relearn how to be a true witness. Kesha's eyes swept the cabin, pausing on each face, as if speaking privately to each one. I don't need you to remember my name, but I hope that after today, when you see injustice anywhere, in an airport, at work, on the street, you will remember this moment. That silence means permission, and that speaking up, even with a single phrase, "I saw," can change everything. A middle-aged woman in 3A, who earlier had only recorded quietly, lifted her hand. Her voice trembled. I'm ashamed I didn't intervene sooner. I saw, but I was afraid of being pulled in. Today I learned that silence is also a form of complicity. Kesha nodded gently, her gaze softening. Ma'am, realizing that is the first step to becoming a good witness. None of us is perfect, but every experience teaches us to be stronger the next time. She turned back to the cabin, her voice rising, each word firm and deliberate. What happened today is not just about Skylink Airlines. It will ripple outward because you will tell it. You will tell your families, your friends, your colleagues. And that story will not be a female CEO misunderstood, but I saw injustice and I learned I must act. That is the true legacy of this moment. Another wave of applause, this time warmer, longer. Passengers leaned toward each other, whispering words of agreement. Kesha lifted her hand slightly, signaling calm, then lowered her voice, almost a whisper, yet carrying through the cabin. We often think that to change the world, one needs power, wealth, titles. But sometimes it begins with a witness willing to say, "I saw, and I will not let it be buried." Today, you became those witnesses. Rodriguez looked at her, his eyes filled with respect and gratitude. He knew, he who had stayed silent too long, that this moment would change how he saw every passenger from here on. Maria Santos pulled out her phone, not to live stream, but to type a short note. Always be a good witness. She knew it would become her motto. The cabin no longer felt tense. It became a kind of ritual, a silent oath shared among strangers who understood they had just become part of a small but meaningful history. Kesha smiled, for the first time truly at ease since boarding. Thank you. Thank you for not just witnessing, but choosing to learn. Tomorrow, when you tell this story, remember, it is not just about me. It is about us, about the power of good witnesses. The first-class cabin erupted in a third round of applause, long and resonant, the full stop to an unplanned speech that reached straight into every heart. The engines hummed softly as the plane began to taxi slowly down the runway. The clock showed the flight was already more than 25 minutes behind schedule. Yet no one in the cabin seemed impatient. They had just witnessed an event far beyond a simple delay. Dr. Kesha Johnson leaned gently back into seat 2A, her hands clasped atop the Hermes Birkin resting neatly on her lap. The soft cabin light reflected against the window glass, casting her face in profile, serene on the surface, though beneath it ran a powerful current. She closed her eyes briefly. In that instant, the voices of those early insults echoed again in her memory. "This isn't your place. That card must be stolen." The invisible blade of prejudice, cold and familiar. Even now, standing at the summit of power, she still had to hear them. But then other images surged forward. Maria's steady gaze, the nod from the man in 4C, the unplanned waves of applause. Kesha opened her eyes, scanning the cabin, faces of strangers, yet now connected by an invisible thread. They had endured a trial together, and together they had changed. Inside her, a question rose. If today I were not me, without the black card, without shares, without power, what would have happened? Perhaps she would have been dragged off the plane, mocked in viral clips, left behind in silence. The thought tightened her chest. How many others had endured that fate, with no one to defend them, no one to even know their names? Kesha looked down at the phone in her hand. The screen pulsed with dozens of notifications. Lawyers, assistants, shareholders, reporters. She knew the media storm was about to erupt, but for now, sealed within the cabin's pressurized air, she allowed herself a moment of stillness. She remembered her father's words from childhood. You can win in two ways, with the loudest voice or with the steadiest silence. But remember, silence only has power if it carries preparation within it. Today, she had chosen steady silence, And a lifetime of preparation, knowledge, contracts, position had turned that silence into an unassailable weapon. The plane gathered speed, then lifted free of the ground. Atlanta shrank beneath her. Through the window, clouds drifted past, and within herself she whispered, "Change has taken flight, and no one can drag it back down." She rested her head against the seat, exhaling a long breath. The battle in the cabin was over. But the true journey, the one that would force an entire industry to face itself, had only just begun. 6 months later, the skies above Atlanta gleamed bright on an early summer morning, Skylink Airlines jets slicing through the clouds like silver arrows. Yet for those following the aviation industry, a number mattered more than the planes lifting off. The latest internal report from Skylink revealed complaints of discrimination had dropped 73% compared to the same period the previous year. A dry figure, but behind it were hundreds of passengers who had boarded flights without being scrutinized, humiliated, or suspected simply because of their appearance or skin color. From that day, the day Dr. Keisha Johnson stood in first class and turned humiliation into a charter for change, the entire Skylink system had shifted. Another report noted more than 100 cases submitted through the new Passenger Advocate Hotline and app had been addressed within just 24 hours of filing. Of these, 94% were fully resolved with official responses from regional leadership. That number far outpaced the industry average, where replies often took weeks, even months. It wasn't only Skylink. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, conducted a broad survey. The result, passenger trust in fairness in air service, had risen 42% in just half a year, an extraordinary leap in an industry long branded as slow to change and deeply conservative. The media called it the Washington Protocol Effect, after the name of the CEO who had set the foundation. But inside Skylink, people used a simpler phrase, Day 2A. The day everything changed, beginning from seat 2A in first class. Financials followed suit. After the initial scandal, Skylink stock plummeted within 24 hours, but quickly recovered once the comprehensive reform plan was announced. 6 months later, shares of Consolidated Airways International, Skylink's parent company, were up 18.7%. Analysts explained investors believed turning crisis into reform was the right strategy, and Dr. Keisha Johnson had been the catalyst for that confidence. And Washington Aerospace Industries, Keisha's own company, they had just announced an expanded $340 million contract with Skylink, raising the total value of their partnership to its highest in history. Ironically, the incident that could have ended the relationship became the bedrock of a stronger, more transparent alliance. At the quarterly press conference, the CEO of Consolidated Airways admitted to the media, "We learned that fairness is not just ethics, it is a competitive advantage, and we owe Dr. Johnson for forcing us to look in the mirror." Not only at the executive level. On the front lines, the numbers were even more striking. 97% of Skylink staff completed mandatory unconscious bias training, a 15-hour program with real-world simulations. Post-training assessments showed awareness levels had risen by an average of 62%. Maria Santos, the passenger in 3B who had live-streamed in Spanish, went on to found her own consultancy, Voz Clara, Clear Voice, specializing in training airlines on diversity and equity. In just 6 months, she had signed with 3 major Latin American carriers, and in every presentation, Maria began with the same line, "I was once a silent witness until the day I sat on flight SK-127. And David Boston, the businessman in 1C who mocked and live-streamed for clout, his video was now officially used by Skylink in internal training, not as a cautionary tale of malice, but as a reminder that even those who err can learn. In a recent interview, David confessed, "I learned that being a witness isn't just holding up a camera. I had to become part of the solution. And that changed me, even within security." Officer Martinez, who had stepped into the cabin that day, was now promoted to Director of Passenger Protection at Skylink. His first initiative, partnering with civil rights organizations to train security staff in de-escalation and bias elimination. In a press briefing, he said, "Dr. Johnson didn't just save one passenger, she saved us from the habit of working on false assumptions." And Janelle Williams, the flight attendant who had live-streamed the incident, her story took another turn. Terminated that very day, Janelle spent months searching for herself. At first, she blamed cancel culture, but one day she enrolled in a diversity and inclusion certification program. In a local interview, she admitted tearfully, "I saw the darkest side of myself that day. Dr. Johnson had the power to destroy me, but she chose to reform the system instead. That made me ask myself, what legacy will I leave?" Beyond Skylink, the ripple spread wide. 3 other major North American airlines announced they were adopting new verification protocols modeled on the Washington Protocol. The FAA was drafting national anti-discrimination standards for aviation, set to be issued next year. And in flight attendant academies, a new case study titled Day 2A had become mandatory coursework. 6 months later, the legacy of that flight had already become the new standard. When Dr. Keisha Johnson was asked at a conference, "What makes you proudest about this change?" she simply smiled. Not the numbers, not the contracts, but the fact that an ordinary passenger sitting in the middle row can now believe they will be treated with dignity without needing a powerful business card. The impact of Flight SK Council 1247 didn't just show up in financial reports or procedural documents. It rippled through real people, individuals who might have seemed like passing figures in the story but carried away marks that could never be erased. Maria Santos, the young Latina woman in seat 3B, once kept her head down in silence as the conflict erupted, but the moment she chose to live stream in Spanish became a turning point. 6 months later, Maria was no longer just a passenger. She had become the founder of a consultancy called Voz Clara, Clear Voice. Her small office sat in a working-class neighborhood, but on the wall hung a poster printed from the photo of her lifting her head that day on the flight. In workshops, she often told her audience, "I was once afraid, once silent, but one day I learned that a witness can change an entire industry." David Boston, the white businessman in seat 1C, who at first mocked and live-streamed with sneering comments, was now a frequent face in Skylink's internal training programs. His video was replayed, and he himself would stand up and say, "I was once the worst example, but I chose not to stay there." Friends who once laughed at him for being disgraced now looked at him with respect. And in a local TV interview, David's voice broke. "That day, I thought I was being entertaining. In truth, I was hurting someone for no reason. Now I want to spend the rest of my life making amends." Officer Martinez, the security officer who stepped into the cabin with a commanding voice, was now Director of Passenger Protection. But for him, more important than the title was the shift in perspective. In a meeting with new recruits, he said, "Before, I only saw duties. Now, I see people." No one deserves to have prejudice pressed onto their shoulders. Many young officers listened to his account of SK 21247 in silence, realizing their job was not just to guard safety, but to guard human dignity. Margaret Thompson, the elderly woman in seat 1D who once clapped along when Janelle mocked Kesha, had her own turning point. She joined Skylink's new Passenger Advisory Board, a body created to gather feedback from travelers to improve service. At its launch, Margaret declared, "I once believed I understood everything, but I realized prejudice can blind us. I don't want to leave this world without trying to make it right." The room rose in applause, not because she had been wrong, but because she dared to admit it and change. And Janelle Williams, the flight attendant who once live-streamed with glee, had endured bitter months. She lost her job, her reputation, and struggled with anger. But one day, Janelle enrolled in a diversity and inclusion training program. In a local interview, she lowered her head and admitted, "I saw the darkness in myself. Dr. Johnson could have destroyed me completely, but she chose to change the system instead of seeking revenge. And that forced me to look at myself." Today, Janelle works at a nonprofit, helping train young people in respect and dignity in customer service. Even those on the sidelines, the silent passengers who only watched and dared not speak, said they were no longer the same. One woman emailed Skylink, "I was in seat 2C that day. I didn't dare say anything. But in the past 6 months, I've learned to stand up when I see injustice at my child's school. I owe Dr. Johnson my courage. Each person, each fate was like a small ripple. But together, they became a tide, spreading outward from that airplane cabin into society at large." The impact of Flight SK 1247 did not stop at Skylink Airlines or a handful of internal reports. It spread across the entire industry, forcing institutions long accustomed to sluggishness, even outright conservatism, to change. Just 3 months after the incident, the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) released a draft known as the Washington Standards. For the first time in U.S. aviation history, an anti-discrimination handling procedure was included in a federal regulatory draft. The very measures that had seemed confined to that cabin, official ticket verification, a ban on employees live streaming passengers, mandatory recurring unconscious bias training, were now written into federal text to be applied across the entire industry. The press called it the Washington Effect. Papers like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times ran headlines, "From Seat 2A to Congress: How One Incident Reshaped U.S. Aviation." Commentators noted that never before had a single personal situation sparked a federal-scale reform so swiftly. The aviation insurance sector also adjusted. Insurers began requiring airlines to hold unconscious bias training certification and passenger reporting systems before issuing or renewing contracts. Maria Santos, now a consultant, recalled, "One company asked outright, 'Do you comply with the Washington Protocol? If not, we'll charge higher premiums.' Reform had become financial pressure, an incentive no airline could afford to ignore. In Congress, several lawmakers cited SK 1247 directly when debating the Passenger Dignity Act. The bill proposed creating a federal hotline for in-flight discrimination complaints and required the FAA to publish annual transparency reports. A black senator from Georgia declared, "We saw a CEO forced to stand up after humiliation, but most Americans don't have a powerful business card. This act is to protect them." In education, aviation schools added a new module, Case Study SK 147. The image of Dr. Kesha Johnson standing calmly in the cabin, facing down an entire system, became a lesson in leadership, crisis management, and ethics. Aviation students simply called it the Seat 2A lesson. Even international carriers could not ignore it. A major European airline announced it would adopt passenger reporting models based on the Washington Protocol. An Asian carrier introduced the SK 147 incident into its best practices training program. From a single airplane cabin, the effect spread across continents. Dr. Johnson never testified before Congress, nor did she launch a flashy media campaign. She only smiled when asked, "Do you think you changed the airline industry?" Her reply was simple, "I don't think I changed it. I just forced them to look in the mirror. The rest, they decided themselves." That plane landed long ago, but its echoes still fly, not in engines or steel wings, but in the way a system was forced to change, in the way ordinary people learned that they could become good witnesses. Dr. Kesha Johnson's story was never just about a dramatic reversal, nor merely about a female CEO using power to defend her dignity. What made that moment immortal was her choice to turn pain into reform, to turn humiliation into the foundation of a new culture. And most importantly, it is not a story reserved for those with black cards, with shares, with power. It is for all of us, the ones who have been silent, who have trembled, who have been dismissed, who have witnessed injustice and not known what to do. The message from that first-class cabin was simple, yet powerful. You don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes all it takes is quiet preparation, steady silence, and one timely sentence. "I saw this. I will not let it be buried," to turn the tide. And now I want to ask you, how many times have you witnessed injustice in daily life, in school, at work, or on the street? What did you do when you saw it? Did you choose silence, or will you choose to be a good witness? If this story has touched you, share it. Let your friends, colleagues, and family understand that respect is not a privilege, but a standard. Let the comments below be more than fleeting reactions. Let them be commitments. I will not stay silent when I see injustice. And if you believe stories like this need to be told more often, hit subscribe. Here, we will continue to bring stories of resilience, of dignity, of people who choose to use silent strength to raise the standards for all of us. Remember, you don't need to raise your voice to raise the standard, but you must raise your expectations and force the world to rise to meet them.